All right, in this series of videos, we're going to be talking about the module system in JavaScript. In the 2010s, the module system was sort of a mess. So there's several different standards. We have sort of finally settled on the ECMA module system, which is ECMAScript is the standards body that's responsible for designing the standards that all the JavaScript engines use to actually create their JavaScript engines. So the standards body finally came up with ECMAScript modules, and it's been implementing them over the course of the 2010s. And so now things are finally kind of settled down, but there's still a lot of code using various different modular systems. So I wanted to discuss some of that. So the first sort of mainstream module system with JavaScript came about due to the advent of Node.js or server-side JavaScript. So server-side JavaScript allows you to run JavaScript just like any other scripting language on your local machine. So like Python or anything like that, it has access to things that the browser JavaScript engine does not. It can open files. It can do pretty much anything any common scripting language can do. As you can imagine, you wouldn't want the browser to have access to these sort of things, right? You don't want to download code from the internet, from a website, and then suddenly it can access your file system, right? That's not something you want. And that's why the browser JavaScript engine is isolated. It's sandboxed from your system. So there's these two different versions of JavaScript. There's browser JavaScript and then server-side JavaScript, which is like your scripting JavaScript. So in order to have a server-side JavaScript, you need to be able to import modules, which is very common in any scripting language. You don't need all of the various components of the language in every single program, so you want to import different things at a time, depending on what your use case is. So the CommonJS module system shipped with Node.js since around 2009, and that was sort of the first modular system of JavaScript. JavaScript was growing rapidly at the time. All right, and so this allowed you to import different functionality into JavaScript system and access things like being able to access the FS library, which stands for file system. So this allows you to, read and write files and different things like that, or copy files, that sort of thing. All right, so this module syntax you'll see all over the place. This is the older style CommonJS, but it has been around for a very long time, and so you'll see this everywhere. You recognize it by use of this, require syntax. So this require function is a built-in function, and then you pass in the name of the node module, and then you just set it equal to some variable. All right, so this was the standard way of importing different modules. And you could use this as well. We're going to demonstrate, we're going to build our own miniature module here that's just going to mimic the copy function. And then we're going to import our own module in another file. Okay, but this is how you would import the built-in Node.js libraries. All right, a couple things to note. This has a .js extension. Okay, so with all the different module systems, all of these different files use the .js extension, and so it's not really clear anymore what a .js extension means, because it could you could parse this different ways. The modular systems are not interoperable. All right, interoperable. So really, in most cases, the .js syntax, personally, I would avoid it. I would change it to .cjs. .js, in my opinion, is generally CommonJS, but they're also trying to move .js to be the new module syntax, and that's also causing a lot of confusion. So if you want to be very, very clear, CJS stands for CommonJS, and that will work using this require syntax, right? If you want to use the newer module system, which we'll get into next, use MJS, modular JavaScript, okay? And then most throughout at least the last decade or so, .js has meant CommonJS, generally speaking. There are some modular JS projects that just call it JS, so it's kind of a mix, but more often than not, it is CommonJS, so that might change in the future, but generally I would just avoid the .js extension. All right, so here we are requiring FS. It stands for file system, and again, this is something that server-side JavaScript has access to, and the browser does not, for obvious reasons. So what we want to do is just make a little copy function. We're going to define a function here, call it copy, and we're going to pass in two arguments here, path 1 and path 2, right? And the idea here is we just want to call into the fs module and run copy file sync. Okay, so with most of the server-side JavaScript libraries, there are two versions of the functions, the different things that you can do in a particular module, like copy file. There is a function called copy file, and that is asynchronous. Okay, so we're gonna dive into asynchrony in a little while, but for now, just know that JavaScript is single-threaded, and you want to be able to do as many things as you can on that single thread. So you want things to be asynchronous. So you start something up and then move on to something else instead of doing it synchronously. If you do something synchronously, this is basically saying our program is going to stop and wait for this thing to complete before our program can finish. Okay, so it basically locks up the thread. For little scripting projects like what we're doing here, most of the time you will just want sync. There are a lot of additional things you have to think about when you're coding asynchronously, but for larger professional projects, a lot of the times you're going to actually want to use the asynchronous nature of JavaScript, but it does require you to think about your code a little bit differently. All right, so for now, we'll do this like a standard programming language, like a Python or something like that, where everything's synchronous, and we're going to call into the file system module, copy file sync, and we just pass in our two arguments, so path 1 and path 2. Okay, so that's our copy function. And then just to explain, I'll copy this in there for completeness. Let me move that here. Right, so the program waits until the operation has completed to continue, right? So this ties up the Node.js process, and it's inefficient for larger programs, but perfectly fine for these small programs. Okay, so that's fine. And this function that we've built here, this is a copy function, and this is just a delegation pattern. We're taking whatever arguments we get here from copy, and we're passing it into copy file sync. If we wanted to be more robust with this to make it a true delegation pattern, we would return the value of whatever copy file sync gives us, and we would want to pass in all of the args exactly as they were collected, right? So you could do something like this, args, or actually that is going to collect up all the arguments, right, and then pass them directly into copy file sync. Okay, so when the spread operator is used in a function definition, it collects all of the items that are separated by columns into an array, and then when the spread operator is used in the context of calling a function as opposed to defining one, then it basically unpacks the args array and places the individual items from the array as individual arguments to the function call. All right, so this is a common pattern. It's a proxy pattern, right? And it's basically a wrapper function that delegates to another function. Very simple. And then the last thing, we just want to export this function. So we're done making our module. This is a really simple, trivial module, but we want to export this copy function so that we can use it in other programs. So ideally, you would have lots of these different functions, and you'd say module.exports. So these are keywords. There's a special module object in CommonJS that has a .exports property. Anything you attach to this .exports object is actually exported onto the module when you load it. Okay. So also a couple side notes, you may not have seen this syntax before. If you have a CommonJS or if you have a Node script, it now supports the hashbang on top, so you can use the Linux style hashbang, and then you can, if you're using Linux or Mac OS, You can make the file executable, and what that does is, this is a module, so we wouldn't want to execute it directly, but the next program we're going to make is going to import this, and we might want to execute that directly. So that would allow us to just move both the file and the dependency into a bin folder, and you could execute them like any other standard script. Okay, so that's just a little side note there. All right, so here's our module. Very simple. There's a built-in import, right, a require. So this is CommonJS. We have one function, basically a delegation pattern, and then we're exporting it. Okay, so let's make the next file, and this is going to be the CommonJS main program, right? And we're just going to call this JS, right? And we can use the hashbang again, and if you have Linux or Mac OS, might want to make that executable. I gotta save my module here. There we go. All right. So now with this CommonJS program, I want to use the require function again. Now notice when we were using the require function in the last program, we didn't have this // in the front, right? So that we were importing a built-in library. So if I don't include a relative type path, JavaScript assumes that that's some sort of node module, okay? So instead, what we want is we want our own module, right? So we're going to specify a relative path to the location of the module from where this script is located, right? So our script is CommonJS program.js. So in this same directory, the / means this directory, and then we're looking for this. All right, so the extension here is optional, but in the new module system, it's not optional, so it's probably a good idea to go ahead and add it. And that's just another clue to let you know that this is not a built-in package, right? If for some reason somebody misses the visual cue there, right? All right, so this is what we want to use. We're going to get the copy function from this. And this program is more like a utility program, like a command line program. And so we're going to want to access some arguments. So a couple of things we can do first, though, is let's just examine what's inside of this. So console.dir allows us to kind of look at what's inside of this utils object, right? And it's nice that we can name this variable whatever we want. So the name of the module is here, and then this is the module to import, and we just save it in this variable name. So we want to just take a look at what's inside of this. So let's pull open. So we want to run the CommonJS program. All right, and so you see we do indeed have this module. The module is just an object, right? And it has one attribute, copy, and that is from our CommonJS utilities. That is this object, the module.exports, and we attach to that object.copy, right? So module.exports is CommonJS, and require is CommonJS. Okay, so console.dir, that's fine. Well, what does our program need? Our program needs to have arguments, right? That's normally how the copy program works on Linux and Mac. So let's grab some arguments. We can grab those from the process special variable that's accessible in Node.js, server-side JS. Arguments aren't something you would have, like program arguments aren't something you would have in the browser. It's only if you're executing your programs from the terminal, right? Scripting server-side JS. So let's look at process.argv. So argv stands for argument vector. All right, so most scripting languages or programming languages have some way to access arguments from the command line, and so let's console.log this. All right, we'll take a look at that. Okay, so right away I didn't provide any arguments to the program, and so but we see that there are two items in our argument vector. The first one is the location of the node application that is running this program, right? And it's very common to have multiple instances of Node installed for different projects, right? So this tells you exactly which version of Node you're using on the system. And then the next argument is the location of the script that you're running itself, okay? So these two items show up in all of your argv whenever you reference process.argv, and rarely do you need them. And so most of the time we're just going to strip them off. Okay, so what you'll see me do is we'll say args equals process.argv. You can use the .slice function, and we want to start at slice 2, and we could go to an ending point or just leave it off, and that's essentially going to the end of the list. So this gives us an args where we sliced off the beginning values, right? So all of the arguments that you get from a program are going to be string values. If you need to convert them to something else, you'll have to do that manually. All right. So here we need a console.log, and we can look at our args. Okay, so I can run this again, and I can say cat dog. All right, so here again is process.sys.argv. These are really the arguments that we care about, so most of the time we just strip these off with the slice method, and then we're left with args. Okay, in our case, we want to copy some file. So let's create something to copy. So we have new file. We'll call this foo.txt. All right, and in here, I'm just going to type foo just to make sure we have some text in there. All right, and what I want to do is access from our module utils. I want to access that copy function, right? So very simply, utils.copy, and then we pass in the arguments, and we can use the spread operator again because args is an array, and so we can spread out that array as individual arguments to the copy function, and if all goes according to plan, we should be able to reference multiple arguments, and this is basically just going to pass them directly into our copy function, which is a proxy for the built-in fs copy file sync. All right, so let's run this. We want to copy foo.txt to bar.txt. Okay, so we get this output from before, but we also see that we have a new file, and it indeed has the same text. Okay, so this is the CommonJS module system, and this is the server-side scripting. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the same program, except we're going to use the ECMA module system. All right, so the EMS, as it's commonly referred to, this is the new standard. Now, the reason I'm showing you the CommonJS pattern is because that code is everywhere. You're going to see it. The new pattern you're going to want to try to use most of the time, and this is ECMA module, the ECMA module system. All right, so let's make a new file here, and we'll call this ECMA module utilities. And we're going to call this MJS. So remember, I discussed the problems with the extension. We want to be very clear that this is a ECMA module system. All right, so modular JavaScript. And that extension is important because when I run this with Node, there's different syntax for importing and exporting items in your module, and Node automatically recognizes the .mjs extension as modular JavaScript. You will get an error if you have CommonJS imports in an MJS, and vice versa if you have MJS imports and exports in a CommonJS file. The middle ground that's unclear is the JS files. So that's why either avoid JS, or I would say use JS for CommonJS, because that's what it's been used for well over a decade now. So MJS, use that if you have modular JavaScript. Okay. So let's take a look at this. How can we identify modular JavaScript? First of all, let's add our hashbang, and I just do this for all of my server-side JavaScript. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, so the ECMAScript module system, EMS, was standardized in 2015. but there's a long period of unadoption, and these are just two of the module systems that were prevalent. They're the most prevalent. CommonJS has been around probably the longest, and then ECMA module system is the newest, and it's sort of the new standard. There are different modular systems in between that were used, and I'm not going to bother you going through all that. The whole modular system of JavaScript throughout the 2010s was sort of a mess. Okay, but now we have the mass adoption and transition to ECMAScript module system. All right, so we're pretty much set. This is the direction things are going in, which is nice. All right, so you have to use the .mjs extension if you're going to do this in server-side JavaScript. And I recommend in the browser side also using the .mjs extension. So that's modular JavaScript. All right. One distinction, the modules, the ECMAScript modules make use of strict mode by default. All right. So in these other JavaScript programs, I might have to type in use strict if I wanted to specifically use strict mode. And most of the time you would want to use strict mode. Right. So this is just a string value and a semicolon at the top of a script or at the top of a function. And this is backwards compatible with older JavaScript engines because it's just a string literal, right? So it's going to process that fine. It's not a special keyword or anything. So this is for backwards compatibility. However, what it does is if you have a newer JavaScript engine, certain things are disallowed because they probably shouldn't have been added to the language to begin with, right? So strict mode is something you can add to these older style modules, but by default, that's what we want. And so on ECMA modules, we're there by default. Okay, so how is this different from CommonJS? Obviously, the syntax here, import, this is the variable name from, and then this is the module, okay? That's basically all there is to it. We can import this. We want to create a function just like we had before. So we have path 1 and path 2, right? Maybe we want to use the spread operator, args. Okay, and this just shows us that this is a true pass through. So even if fs.copyFileSync doesn't return anything, we're going to still return whatever it returns, right? So this is a true pass through because we're returning the same thing and we're passing in everything exactly as we received it. Okay, so here we're exporting our copy function. Note the use of just the export keyword. So we have import and export. So this is EMS, ECMAScript Module System, right? This is exporting a fragment. So you can export individual items from a module like we're doing here, right? But then also if you want to export a packaged group of things, kind of like we did in the CommonJS style, you export a default object. And this object can contain all of the individual fragments if you want, or it can be something different entirely, right? But a common pattern would be to export the fragments individually, so you can just import those if you want, and then also export a default, which is an object containing all of those individual items. All right. So we'll take a look at how this works. It's basically the same way. The key takeaway, you just use the import keyword. This is your variable name, right? And then the export keyword. So you can export individual fragments or export a default object. All right, so new file. This is ECMA module program.mjs. So ECMA module, this is the main program.mjs. And we are going to try to import the module we just made. All right, so I have my hashbang, make it executable. All right, and this is pretty simple. We are going to import, we're going to use the default import. Okay, so partial imports, import fragments. We're gonna do that next. Actually, let's remove this. This is the entire import the entire module. So import the default module export. Okay, so the module exports some default, and this is going to import that default thing and store it in the variable util. Okay. Also note that we have to have relative imports, and you must have the extension. Okay, so we have to have the extension here. It's optional in CommonJS, but go ahead and do it. And then we have to have ./ right? That's going to say this directory relative to where this file is located. Okay, so we'll import URL or utils from ECMA module utilities. We can do the same things that we did in the other thing, or the other program, right? We first examined what was in the module. Got the arguments, right? So we can kind of do the same thing here. Paste that in there and just take a look at what we have. So maybe we call this utils instead of util. All right, now we can run this. All right, so this is ECMA module program. All right, I didn't provide any values. If I want cat and dog, I can provide those, same thing, right? But we still have the same idea, right? So we are exporting the default module. So this is an object and it has the different things that we attached, right? So when I import like this, this is just importing the default export. Okay, so the default export again was this object. All right, and then all we do is we just call into it utils.copy, and we pass in the args that we get. So that's a true pass through, and we can try to run this, and we'll say we want to copy bar.txt to baz.txt. All right, so no errors. We look up here, and we do indeed, we have a copy of bar.txt to baz.txt. Okay, there's one other way to import things with ECMA module system, right? Instead of importing the entire default export, right? What we can do is we can import individual items, and we can do that with the curly brace syntax, right? So I can do something like this. This is called a partial import or importing fragments. All right, so partial imports, and if I do this, I don't have to reference that package, right? So I don't have a name for the entire package. I just directly imported that one thing into the scope of my file, right? And so I'll comment that out, and we just use copy directly then, right? And you can separate this by commas. You can have, like, if you had a move function or any other thing, you can basically add all of these functions directly into the scope of your current script or module. All right, so that's the alternative way to do this, and we can do that again. Let's delete Baz. Okay. Oh, there is no utils object now. Right, so this doesn't exist anymore, right? So we'll run that, and it executes fine, and we do have a copy. Okay, so that's CommonJS modules on the server side, and then ECMAScript module patterns on the server side. Next video is going to be about the browser side. CommonJS modules don't really exist on the browser side. They were designed specifically because of the advent of server-side JavaScript to be able to import different libraries like FS, things that you can do on server-side that you can't do on the browser. So historically, the browser side has had a different way of loading things. And we'll go kind of, it attaches things, libraries that load, it attaches an object to the global object, so that way you have access to it. So that's sort of been the default for a long time, but now there's a new modular system, and we'll go into the difference of that next time.